Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video. You guys really like when I upload content on The Walking Dead, and I did promise that I would do this video in the previous video that I did on The Walking Dead. So this is my official review and predictions for Season 3 of Daryl Dixon. My review of the finale, what I like, what I dislike, and yeah, without further ado, let's just get into the video. So the first thing that I want to say in regards to this show is that I really did enjoy it. But in terms of Season 1 versus Season 2, I have to say that I really did enjoy Season 1 more than I enjoyed Season 2. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that it was new, it was fresh, it was a brand new story, Daryl was in a new place. And while for Season 2 it was really cool to see Carol make her return, I really did feel like the story in parts really drug out, and then at the end it felt a little bit rushed. Now granted, there is going to be a third season, possibly even a fourth season, so we may actually see the story finally have a continuation that doesn't feel rushed, because they are dragging it out like this. But I do, for what it's worth, feel like 6 episodes is just not enough time to get all the story that they want to get out. And I had this problem with some of the other series too. Not so much Dead City. I feel like Dead City was the only series where it was done kind of accurately and well, but definitely with Rick and Michonne's series I had this problem as well. It felt like once we got to the finale, the story just concluded in a way that was super quick, and it was kind of confusing. If you weren't really following along, it definitely was confusing. It just felt really rushed, and it felt like they got to the giant conclusion of bringing down the CRM way too quickly, especially because, as we know, the CRM was a huge operation with some deep-seated roots and a lot of higher-ups that were fighting for its preservation. So the fact that they were able to dismantle it in what seemed like a day really made the story feel rushed. I think in terms of Daryl Dixon, where I felt the story was a little bit rushed was definitely in the finale. They were trying to bring all these stories to a head right at the end for one giant conclusion. They were trying to bring together to a close the story of Carol and Sophia, as well as the story of Daryl and Isabel, and even, one could argue, the story of Codron and his brother. And the fact that they were trying to bring all these together at the end, really, it felt rushed. I feel like each story could have been brought to an end in the same episode, and it was a possibility, but they waited until, like, the final, 15 minutes of an hour-long episode to bring them all to a head. And the way that they did it, the setting of it was pretty cool. The premise of it was pretty cool. I don't know how they would have worked that in any other way except for having it take place in the premise that it did. But it left a little bit to be desired in terms of the length, in terms of what we were actually seeing being brought to a conclusion, and in terms of how it was done, how it felt a little bit rushed. But I will give props to them in so many different areas. The bioluminescent area in the tunnel felt really cool. Introducing these 2 new characters adds an element to the plot of the story that I think we will see thicken in Season 3, and I'm really excited to see where that goes. And the cliffhanger that they left us on leaves a lot of things open, so let's get into that. So one of the things that I really want to talk about in regards to this is characters that we might see returning for Season 3. And I think a very big possibility for one of these is obviously Codron. We don't know what happens to him. All we see is that he goes off chasing a hallucination of his brother through the tunnel. Now, for both Codron and for Carol, both of their hallucinations were people whose deaths they, in part, felt responsible for. Carol obviously felt responsible for Sophia's death in the extent that she wasn't watching her closely enough when she ran off and then eventually ended up getting killed by walkers and thrown in the barn. And Codron obviously felt responsible for the death of his brother because he is the reason that his brother was in the military, Madame Janae's military, with him. So obviously there was a burden of guilt, a burden of responsibility that was felt by the 2 of them, and that's why they saw the hallucinations that they saw. You could even argue the same with Daryl and his seeing of Isabel, because he in part felt responsible for her death because he was essentially the reason that she was locked up, at least in his mind. Now obviously, for those of us who watch the show, we know there were extenuating circumstances, and she really was just trying to be on the right side of everything, and she was in love with him, which added a whole other element to the story. Now, for Carol and for Daryl, they were able to overcome their hallucinations. So, will Cadron have been able to do the same? It's a possibility, but we don't exactly know where he went or where he'll end up. So, it'll be interesting to see if they try to incorporate him into Season 3. They left it open-ended, so I think it's a very real possibility, and it's something that we could see in Season 3. Now, obviously, one of the big questions for going into Season 3 is, will we see the return of Laurent and Ash? Now, personally, I don't really think that we will. I actually really like both of these characters, especially Ash, and when he was introduced in Carol's storyline towards the beginning of the show, I was really worried that they were going to kill him off like they did to some of the other characters that were introduced very early on in some of the other series, like Dead City and Rick and Michonne series, The Ones Who Live, but I was a little bit surprised that they didn't, but I also see that he was an essential part of the story. However, I don't know that that means he will survive in Season 4 if he's even featured at all. And I think if he and Laurent are featured, it will only be showing their side of the story as they are getting back to the U.S., as they are trying to find the Commonwealth, and I think that also adds a whole other element to the story too. In my previous video I did on The Walking Dead, I talked about some of the announcements that they made from New York Comic Con, and I talked about how Scott Gimple said he was going to make a new series, or they were working on a new series, that was going to be completely different from any other series that they'd done before. And I think it's possible that if we do see Laurent and Ash again, it could be in this series, if my theory about it being a series based around the Commonwealth and Alexandria is correct. I theorize that it might be a series where Gabriel runs the show, along with Ezekiel and Aaron and some of the other fan favorite characters from the original show that we don't really get to see anymore, that don't have their own spin-off series, and it would be set in the Commonwealth, and it would be set around Alexandria, and one of the first arcs in the story, one of the first conflicts in the plot, could be these two guys show up, and those guys are Ash and Laurent, and they're claiming to know Daryl and Carol, who none of the other group has seen in a good while, and they are asking to be let in, and there's a whole conflict over whether or not they should let them in, whether or not they should trust them. They show up with some of their things, Daryl and Carol's things, and if for all they know, they could have killed both of them. So I think that'll be really interesting to see. But in terms of whether or not Laurent will be in Season 3 of Daryl Dixon, I don't think it's very likely. Now, the last video that I did on Daryl Dixon was actually before the second season came out, and I gave my theories for the second season, and also my theories for the third season. And in my theories for the third season, I mentioned a little-known character from the Walking Dead comic books that might be making an appearance in Season 3 of the show. If you've seen that video, or even if you've seen other fan theories about this, you may know that I was talking about Jeffrey Grimes. Jeffrey Grimes is Rick Grimes' brother, who's not really mentioned in the show, but he's alluded to at a few different points in the comics, and he has his own spin-off comic called The Walking Dead, The Alien, in which we see him traveling through Barcelona, Spain, and the comic unfortunately ends with his death. When we learned that Season 3 was going to be set in Spain, obviously fan theories started up immediately as to whether or not we were going to see Jeffrey Grimes. However, a lot of people were dismissive of this theory, stating that if he's dead in the comics, we can probably assume that he's dead in the show. But, as we know, a lot of the characters who die very early in the comics actually make it very late in the show, and vice versa, a lot of the characters who die very early in the show make it very late into the comics. For example, Carol dies very early in the comics, around what would be the prison arc, by committing suicide by Walker. However, Dale actually makes it to the all-out war arc between the Saviors and the Alexandrians. So, do I think it's likely that we will see Jeffrey Grimes in Season 3 of Daryl Dixon? Likely? I don't know. That might be too strong of a word. For me, I think that even if we don't see him, there's going to be some kind of strong allusion towards his character, or towards the existence of his character. As we know, Daryl and Carol are going to end up in Spain. When we left them, however, they were headed to London. So they're going to have to meet someone who knows the landscape and is well-traveled, who will get them to Spain, because I doubt they will end up back on the mainland of Europe on their own. Now, whether or not they end up there by way of friends or foe, I have no clue. I really don't. A lot of the things that I've seen for the teasers, it looks really good, it looks really exciting, and it looks like the atmosphere will be changing a lot from France to Spain. The shot of Daryl riding his motorcycle through the desert is really, really cool, and the shot of the man on horseback is also really interesting, and then people have actually been theorizing as to whether or not this could be Jeffrey Grimes. Now, I think it's a possibility, but I don't think it's very likely. I think that if they're going to use Jeffrey Grimes in this season, they're probably going to save him for something big, and we may not even get to see him until the finale, which would be disappointing, but it would also lead to a lot of hype for the finale, especially if by the time we get there, people have been anticipating it for the entirety of the show, and they're just now revealing it. Imagine there's some kind of overarching villain for the storyline of Season 3, and then at the end we find out that it is Jeffrey Grimes. I feel like this will add an interesting layer to the show. I really want to see how Daryl would react to something like this, considering that Rick actually considers him to be his own brother, even though they're not flesh and blood, because of what they've been through in the apocalypse together. And it would be interesting to see how Rick, if and when this reunion happens, would act towards Jeffrey. If they would be as thick as thieves like they were when they were in high school when Rick stood up for him, or if there would be a bit of standoffishness between them because of, one, the things that Jeffrey may have done when he lived in Europe, and two, the fact that they haven't seen each other in just so long. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed another Walking Dead analysis video. I will have a few more of these coming out here soon. I also plan on doing some really interesting Walking Dead videos, a format that I haven't tried before, and I want to see how you guys like it. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with me about the possibility of Jeffrey Grimes coming into the story? Do you agree with my review of Daryl Dixon? Did you guys feel that parts of the story were rushed and other parts were really well done or drug out? Let me know down in the comments below. As always, remember to like, hit the subscribe button, turn on post notifications so you get notified every time I upload. Go ahead and follow my Twitch. It will be linked in the description below. Turn on notifications for that as well so you get notified whenever I go live. And be sure to check out our new merch store that we did just drop this past week. We have some really cool stuff in there, and it would be awesome if you guys could go support. The best way to support is actually probably through buying the merch. Anyways, that's going to be it for this video. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.